So last spring, I received an email from a group of people in the Worship Design Studio, which is an organization led by Dr. Marcia McPhee in the States. And there was this conference that I was invited to bring a group to if I wished. It was like one of those conference things you get in an email that said, bring your group, find out more about worship design in Lake Tahoe. So I did a little bit of research on YouTube, and I talked to some people that had used Marcia McPhee resources and suggested to council that this might be something that we would want to take some money from the Engaging Transformation and take a group of people to Lake Tahoe. It was a significant risk because it wasn't like I had been to a conference with this leadership, and so there's always that anxiety that I have that I'm going to mess up and we're going to spend money when we don't need to or shouldn't. But I am so grateful that these 4 people took that risk with me and that were willing to go to Lake Tahoe on behalf of you as a congregation. And we have some things that we'd like to share with you. But the first thing we'd like to, or I'd like to ask them is how they felt about the conference and what, just initially what their personal feelings were.
Well, my personal feeling, having been to the conference, was that it was, I was inspired by the collaboration, and we've already heard about the different views that people have in worship, and heaven knows, amongst the 5 of us, there's different views of what we like in worship.
Yep.
But we all got there, and it just was an intense collaboration, and it was quite wonderful.
To be honest, I arrived in Lake Tahoe as a low-level skeptic, wondering whether over 3 days of workshop we would be reinventing the worship wheel yet again. Instead, I was overjoyed. Our mandate was to focus on the needs of our present congregation, not some elusive future-filled one, and to do so with respectful, creative inclusion of our church history, of art in all its forms, and of ritual and symbols. The facilitator, Marcia, was brilliant in how she provoked thoughtful deliberation of many aspects of generating an engaging worship environment, including that generally elusive element, how to actually do the practical, realistic work that service planning entails in a creative, meaningful, and efficacious way. The 3 days were eye-opening, inspiring, and energizing, and we all left feeling absolutely recharged, motivated, and armed with concrete, hands-on ways to facilitate our worship planning here at Shaughnessy. And I would like to personally thank the Council for supporting my participation in this workshop.
When Pamela suggested that we do this, I thought, really? 3 days in Lake Tahoe talking about worship design? But then I thought, planning is good. We could do this. It was more than good. It was a fabulous experience. I loved learning the theory and the history behind what we're trying to do, and then trying to apply that in a way that's authentic for us. It really changed how I think about the worship experience, and I'm so glad that all of us went. I think if one person had gone and tried to bring that back, we just wouldn't have gotten it. But having a group go and experience it together was just very, very rich. So thank you.
Like most of us, I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this workshop, but I was quite intrigued by the idea of designing worship from the perspective of a filmmaker, which is the name of Marcia's book. And I listened to some of the podcasts that she has on her website, and I became quite intrigued by them, and I thought, wow, she's got some fabulous ideas. But from our very first session, our group from the Worship and Music Committee were transformed from individuals into ritual artists, our minds buzzing with possibilities. And I'm most thankful for that transformation, to to become a team that is ready, willing, and able to work together and with others to create worship that is meaningful and engaging.
Thank you. So it's always a good sign when you go to the conference first session and somebody turns to you at the end of it and said, that was worth the cost to get us all here at the first session. But we must have heard that at every session, that it just kept building on itself and became this spirit-filled, rich time of learning, of new ways of doing things, of being able to understand worship from a different perspective. And so what we'd like to do now is to share some of the deep learnings that we had in our experience with you. And so maybe some of this will resonate with you, and you'll get sparked, and you'll be able to have a conversation with us about, oh, that just sparked something for me. I wonder if we could do this. So have a listen to these four wise people as they share what was really important to them about the conference.
So I'm going to talk to you about different intelligences and designing worship, and there will be a skill testing question afterwards. A breakthrough moment came on the first full morning of the conference. Our marvelous presenter, Marcia McPhee, told us about why understanding the educational theory of multiple intelligences should inform our approach to worship design. And this inspired us to a very fruitful collaboration together. Why? Because it emphasized that different people have different intelligences, and that sensory-rich worship creates multiple paths to reach people. So that's my tongue twister. Sensory-rich worship creates multiple paths to reach everybody. Now, our Presbyterian forebears took a stern approach. It was all about the Word, no organs, much less any images in the church. But times have changed. Churches have evolved, and we now know that verbal linguistic learners, that's number one, may be fascinated with the text, but going beyond the verbal text to a broader worship experience will reinforce the message for everybody. We also know in our church that many of us respond to musical rhythmic aspects of worship, and some of us respond to different musical rhythmic aspects than others. Integrating music into our worship planning was very exciting amongst the group of us for the next 3 days. Visual spatial intelligence requires attention to the visual. Those of you in the front can turn around for a second here and look at our wonderful Pentecost window, which those of us in the choir get to enjoy every Sunday. We, at the conference at Tahoe, experience the impact of light and darkness, and the use of screens, not for text or music, but as visual art. And for example, we are going to get a screen here in Shaughnessy, and by Pentecost, you'll actually be able to sit looking frontwards and see the Pentecost window. So visual spatial intelligence is something that was important at the conference. Those with logical mathematical intelligence respond to research and numbers, but they also respond to connection and flow as enhancing the worship experience. Our worship design emphasized those threads and connections both within services and among the series of services. Those with bodily kinesthetic intelligence respond to movement, lighting, and active rituals. We want to create meaningful and memorable worship for all. So recognizing diversity in this area is something that will probably be easy to incorporate into a flexible worship series at some point and from time to time. Finally, as we all know here, and as we heard this morning, some of us like warm and engaged interpersonal worship, while others resonate with intrapersonal reflection, times of silence, and meditative singing. So the key is to remember that there are many different intelligences, and that a layered service and intentional and flexible planning will address all of them in an authentic way and over the course of the year.
One of Marcia's key phrases was, "Worship equals ritual art," which is pretty heady stuff, especially for a bunch of Protestants who historically have shied away from both the implications of ritual and religious art. And yet, ritual was at the heart of everything we discussed. Ritual is tied to ancient practices which attempt to bridge the divine and human, an attempt, often through symbols, to help us understand the ineffable and to allow us to sense and feel, rather than rationally understand, a deep connection with something very innate in the individual and collective human soul. I'd like to share with you our experience on the Tuesday night as we undertook a pilgrimage together. A pilgrimage itself is steeped in ritual, ancient in its history and significance as a journey to a sacred place. It requires separation from the common everyday world and invites us to go inward to where the heart and soul of spirituality reside. Our pilgrimage was framed and guided by the writings of a 5th century female pilgrim by the name of Egeria. Probably a monastic of some type, she traveled to Jerusalem and with great insight recorded the prayers, the customs, and the readings of what we now call Holy Week. We began our pilgrimage by exiting the dining hall singing, "I Want Jesus to Walk With Me." This is the piece that we walked in this morning with. And we were greeted by a stunningly beautiful canopy of stars and a flank of individuals holding candles to guide the procession. Nature's awe-inspiring beauty of the night sky combined with candles, humanity's most basic symbol of both concrete and spiritual light, the sign of the divine in our own personal darkness. Even with these simple elements, we were immediately turned inward. 21st century pilgrims sharing a path as had millions done before us for thousands of years. It proved to me that ancient Christian traditions are not relics of the past, but that we are deeply connected to an ancient but living faith. With each subsequent generation of pilgrims, the human journey continues and the collective heart is shared. We arrived in a now candlelit hall and listened to Egeria's account of a long, challenging, and yet meaningful week in Jerusalem. We shared bread and wine in small groups and were reminded of our human connection and our responsibility to others. We blessed ourselves with water, that universal element of healing, of cleansing, and of baptism. We too had entered a sacred space, not beautiful in architecture, but made alive through symbols that spoke to us in a profound way. The experience was personal and yet communal. Our spiritual essence as believers was fed through the common rituals of sharing bread, of blessing with water, of walking together to a sacred site, ancient ways which give us both roots and wings during the 3 days during which we contemplated the nature of worship in time of change. For me, the pilgrimage was exceptionally moving because I was completely unbound within the sacred environment. I had no choir to conduct, no music to get ready, no thought of what was coming up in the service. I could simply be. It's been a very long time since I've had that opportunity to be completely in the sacred present, and it was an exceptional blessing within the gift of 3 very inspired days.
So those of you who know me know that I'm a fairly detailed, conscious person. And okay, is that better? Those of you who know me know that I'm a fairly detailed, conscious person, and I like planning. So one of the highlights for me was the notion of planning worship as a series. And if we choose a theme and then use each of the services to expand on that theme and to hone in on one idea that relates to that theme, you can have a strong worship message with an overarching plot. The length of that series can vary. You can have a mini-series, maybe it'll be 2 services or 3, or it could It could run the whole season, who knows? So think like a filmmaker. Think about your favorite series on TV and how they create mood and bring that message through to you. Are we planning a Game of Thrones? Are we planning Sister Act? Are we planning Brooklyn? What is the mood of our worship series going to be? And we do that in a variety of ways that address all of the intelligences that Cliff talked about. As we plan our series, we'll use certain elements that create that mood, and we call those threads. Those threads provide continuity and integration throughout that series. So how actually are we going to do this? And one of the things that I really liked about her workshop was the practical aspect of it. And she suggests that we create teams that design different series. So rather than having worship and music create all of these, we ask you to help us. You choose a series that seems of interest to you, that you would like to work on, and that series team will create the impact that we want to feel in our worship experience. You don't need to make a long-term commitment. It could be a short series. You could be on that series team, or you can take part in brainstorming sessions where you bring your ideas forward and somebody else takes them, chooses what will go into the series. I hope that you will be as excited by the possibilities that worship series offer as I am. I believe that with your help, we can create worship series that will be rich and meaningful for the whole congregation.
So in our final session on Wednesday morning, the topic that we were talking about was the politics of change. And we know nothing about change here, so it was kind of boring. Marcia talked about resistance to change and why there's resistance to change in worship, and how to help those who are experiencing anxiety about those changes and the discomfort. One of the keys to making change that is meaningful is by adopting the practice of radical hospitality. Just as Jesus taught the disciples and others through parable, Marcia talked through metaphor. So this is the metaphor or the parable of the Brussels sprouts. It's the day of the church potluck, and you're really, really looking forward to going. You know that Mary's going to have her chicken dish there that you just love, and Peter's lasagna is there, and he just cooks it to perfection every time. And as you're going down the table, you come across a bowl of Brussels sprouts? Why would somebody do that? Why would anybody bring Brussels sprouts to a potluck? And more importantly, I hate Brussels sprouts. So now I have a choice. Do I leave because I hate Brussels sprouts? Or do I stay and enjoy the other things that are there? Then I see my friend Joyce. And I know that Joyce really loves Brussels sprouts, and she seems to be pretty happy that they're there. So I feel a bit of a shift and a change of heart. I go to Joyce and I say, I see that the Brussels sprouts are here, and I know you really like them. I may not be that fond of them, but I'm glad they're here for you, because I want you to be fed. Our worship experience is no different. When something new or different happens in worship that doesn't speak to us, we have the choice of seeing it as trivial and not important, or we can see that others find this new thing meaningful and life-giving. We can choose to be upset because that did nothing for me, or we can say to the other, I'm glad you enjoyed that. This involves not only generosity to another, but trust. Trust that those who are leading worship and planning worship will include the things that you love next Sunday. Just like we know in a family, we can't always eat pork chops, which might be our favorite. Sometimes it's someone else's turn for their favorite meal. Cliff spoke of the lens of different intelligences through which we learn, and in the context of worship, experience God. Carol spoke of having a framework that is constant on which we creatively plan and present worship. And Ramona spoke about ritual and traditions that are ancient and can create new life within us. Radical hospitality ties all of these together to help us understand our differences and to see what is precious. To me, radical hospitality means that we care deeply for one another and recognize that another's spiritual needs are as important as our own. It means trusting that you will be cared for and valued. It means trusting in what God is doing here today in our midst. Radical hospitality moves us beyond merely being tolerant or inclusive to embracing what Joan Chittister refers to as living without clenched fists. To achieve this, we must be curious. Rather than dismissing something new, be curious about it. What does it mean? Why was it chosen? Ask someone who likes this new element, what does it mean to them? And then listen deeply to what they have to say. Then say, I'm glad you were fed. We are on this journey together, and my prayer for all of us is that we will be Christ to one another. Amen.